What's your full name?
Charlotte Chrisler. Charlotte, I was an Allen. Charlotte Allen Chrisler.
And your last name is spelled?
Chrisler.
Chrisler. Okay. Okay, this is April
April
27th, 1989.
Mm-hmm.
This is Joe, Todd, and William Vandever, an interview with Charlotte Allen Chrisler in Fort Townsend, Oklahoma. Where were you born?
I was born in the Indian Territory, April the 11th, 1900.
And who is your father?
Carlos Brown Allen.
Carlos?
Brown Allen. C-R-L-O-S, Brown Allen.
And your mother?
My mother was Ethel Walkup Allen.
And where were your parents from? Where were your parents from?
Well, my mother was born in the Indian Territory, and I don't know where my father was born. I don't know that. But they were married in the Indian Territory, Choctaw Nation. And it was sometime before the first of the century, because I was the second child born. The first one died. And so then they moved, that my father drew this homestead out in Kiowa County, 5 miles south of Lone Wolf, at the foot of Round Top Mountain.
That was the Great Lottery of 1901?
Beg pardon?
That was 1901?
Well, I think it was. I don't know when that drawing was.
Okay.
You know that better than I do.
Mm-hmm.
I was very young.
Yeah. Did your parents ever say why they came to Oklahoma?
Why they came to Oklahoma? Well, my grandfather and grandmother lived in the Choctaw Nation. They had 8 children, and my mother was the oldest, so she was from Oklahoma. And I guess my father was too. I don't know much about his background.
Why did your father move from Kiowa County to this part of the state?
He didn't.
He did?
No. My mother and father were separated, and I think they got their divorce around 1906 or 7. And then my mother went to Wichita Falls, Texas, and my father stayed on the homestead, I guess, for a while, and I don't know whatever happened to him. See, I don't know very much about my father. I remember him because we had a home in Hobart, Oklahoma, and he would come and get us and take us to the farm, my brother and myself. My brother was born there on that homestead, and we were just little children, and he'd come by and come out and get us and take us out on the farm, as long as my mother lived there in Hobart.
Now, where were you born? Where were you born?
Well, I can't tell you the exact town, but it was in the Choctaw Nation. And it was somewhere, I remember my family talking about Colgate and Hartshorn and Holdenville. My grandfather ran a grocery store in Holdenville at one time, shortly after the turn of the century.
And
he was Levi Benton Walkup, my grandfather, on my mother's side.
Was he Choctaw?
No. No, he came here after the Civil War.
The little picture you have.
Well, that's quite a story. I don't know. My great-grandmother had married a Benton, and they lived in not too far, I don't think, from the southern part of Missouri, But anyway, you know, Missouri was a divided state. Part of the people believed in the North and part of the South, and my family was Southern. And so my great-grandfather was in the service in the South, from the South. And he was away from home, and my grandmother was there alone, my great-grandmother, with my grandmother, who was a baby. And these Northern soldiers came by and told her to get on a horse and go away because they were going to burn the house. And they took everything out of the house of any value, and then there had been a fire in the fireplace, and they kicked it out kicked out the holes all over the floor. But it was a puncheon floor. Do you know what a puncheon floor is?
No, ma'am.
Well, I think they saw the logs and then they hew them out, and they didn't have any mills, lumber mills, I guess, back then, and that was the kind of floor they had, where it was hand hewn. And these coals just burnt little holes in it and went out, and the house didn't burn. But they took everything out of it. And later, after the war was over, well, while the soldiers were there, she didn't get on this horse like he told her to, like the soldiers told her to. And one of them had built a little bunch of twigs and things under the corner of the house to set fire, and she walked up and kicked him in the butt. And it made him so mad he didn't know what to do. And so he told her she'd better get on that horse or she'd be sorry. And he stooped down again, she kicked him again. So he just picked her up. They put a saddle on this horse and had it ready for her, and set her on this horse and handed her the baby, which was my grandmother. And she left then and went on up somewhere where she thought she'd be safe. And a few days later she went back to the house, and it hadn't burned, but they had taken everything, and that little 3-set wedding gift was gone too. But after the war was over, she found this at a farmhouse, where the lady was a Northern sympathizer, and so she told her that it had been her wedding gift, and she'd like to have it back, and she would give her a dime for it. So the lady took the dime, so that has been handed down through my family all these years.
The history of the house over here.
Well, you know, I bought that house in the 50s and came here from Santa Fe, New Mexico. My husband was with the National Park Service, and so we had been transferred around several places. Our first assignment was Yosemite for about 5 years, and then we went to Crater Lake for 10 years. We went to Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri during the war, and then we were transferred down here to this Lake Texoma, which the Park Service had for a very short time, but finally turned it back to the Army Engineers. And then he was later transferred to Santa Fe, New Mexico.
What was your husband's name? What was your husband's name?
Charles Edgar Chrisler. And we were married in 1923, July the 27th, in Stillwater, Oklahoma.
Why National Park Service? What made him go into Park Service?
Well, my husband was in World War I, and a horse kicked him in the head, and he was hospitalized for quite some time with that, but anyway, he seemed to recover, and then we were married in 23, and we'd been married about 3 years, and he began to have trouble with his eyes, and we were out in Portland, Oregon, and he was an engineer at that time. He'd been building roads and bridges. Payne County, he built bridges in Payne County, and that's where I met him, in Payne County. We were married in Stillwater. But anyway, they finally found out what was wrong with his eyes. It took quite a long time that they discovered that he had a tumor in the pituitary gland, just beneath the brain. And so the doctor recommended that he go back to Boston, Massachusetts for surgery, which he did. and Dr. Harvey Cushing with the medical school at Peter Bent Brigham Hospital in Boston operated on him. And so then we came back to Portland, and he was all right for a little while, but it returned, that tumor returned. So they sent him, the veterans sent him down to Palo Alto, where he was hospitalized for 13 months. And then they treated him with x-ray, and he seemed to be just fine, and he was finally released. And of course he didn't have a job then, you see. So I was working in San Francisco, and so he was fooling around San Francisco, and he went down to the post office, and there was a lot of jobs that you had to take a examination for. One was Park Service, and one was Immigration Service, and one was a yeoman aboard ship sailing to the Orient. And he passed all three of them. He took them and passed all three of them. And then we decided on the Park Service, and that's how come to go in the Park Service.
What was his duties with the Park Service?
What
was his
Well,
duties?
he was at that time called Chief Clerk. I think they have a very fine name for him now, but that was a long time ago, you know. During the Depression.
What did he do in Santa Fe? What did you do in Santa Fe? In Santa Fe, New Mexico?
Oh, he was in the office there. He always did office work. He wasn't a ranger. They call it, well, he was the chief clerk.
Yeah. You could probably ask me about the house in Africa. Know more about that.
For 22 years. And then that tumor came back 4 times. The 4th time it killed him. In 1952, he died.
Tell us about the house, the chief's house.
All right. After my husband died, we lived in Albuquerque at that time, and he died in the Veterans Hospital there in Albuquerque, and he's buried in the National Cemetery in Santa Fe. And I went back to Santa Fe, and I managed a motel for a short time, about 8 months, and then I quit. It was about to wear me out. And then I went to work in the office of the second largest hotel in Santa Fe. And I worked there 2.5 years. And I was pretty worn out by that time too. You see, I was 52 years old when my husband died. And I thought it'd be hard for me to get a job, but it wasn't. I seemed to get along all right. But anyway, we came down here to eastern Oklahoma, where I had been a teenage girl over in McCurtain County during World War I, and to visit an uncle of mine. And we got stuck here. It rained and rained and rained, and so we looked at property just for fun, my aunt and I. And we looked at this Blair place. And so when we went back to Santa Fe, I said to her one day, would you and your husband be interested in moving to eastern Oklahoma if I bought that Blair place? And so she asked him, and he was just delighted. He wanted to retire too. So we came down and I bought that place. And that house was terribly run down. This painting over here on the wall was done by a man who was a little boy when that house was, that was done long before it was redone, you see, as he remembered it as a child. And he painted that, and he's from Snyder, Oklahoma, and gave it to me. There's a lot of mistakes in it. He was a self-taught artist. And so anyway, the south part of the house was still up, but the north part was down. That wasn't there anymore. But the Blairs had been using the back part of it, had been enclosed to make bedrooms, as you know. I guess you have the history of that. They used that house after the Indians quit living in there as a kind of a wayside stop for travelers traveling between Arkansas and the fort here. And they had enclosed that back porch into bedrooms. but they'd all fallen down except one on the south end here, and the Blairs had used that for, it looked like where they'd had a cow in there, you know. And then, but the south end of it was still up, and the breezeway and the stairway up to the south end was all, other part of it was all down, gone. And one day my aunt and I were out in the yard working, and she said, we'd had a storm the night before, and she looked over there and she said, Charlotte, there's something wrong in the old house. I don't know what it is. But that porch end and the fireplace had blown down. This main fireplace was still standing, but there was another fireplace there at the where the porch was, you see. They made a bedroom. But they didn't have stoves, so I guess they had to build fireplaces. So, anyway, then I kept trying to think of it. I knew that had a history to it, but I didn't know exactly what it was. I went in and talked to the editor of the Hugo paper, Jack Stamper, and he said, oh, let it rot down. We've got too many old houses here anyway. So I didn't know what to do, but anyway, it wasn't too long till Miss Wright, you know her, she came down and talked to me, and she went to Washington, D.C. and found some papers on the building of the old house, and then they notified me that there would be some people from Oklahoma City to come and see the old house. Well, Mr. Short was one of them, and Miss Wright, and there was two great big busloads of them, and they seemed to be more interested in our garden than they were the old house at that time. But anyway, Mr. Short was interested. And so we had a nice visit, and he didn't come back again, but Miss Wright was there many times to visit. And the old farmhouse was moved in there from Swing. And when I bought it, it was in a terrible condition. That roof leaked, and I had to put new floors through the middle of the house, and I had to fix the kitchen, make one of the rooms into a kitchen, and I had built-ins put in and new windows put in, and the Blairs had lived there, and they'd stuffed pillows in the broken windows, and it was a mess. I didn't know it was quite so bad until after they moved out, and I saw what they painted the house, and if there was a picture on the wall, they just painted around it, the room, they just painted around it, so when they took the picture down and moved, there was that odd spot. So anyway, there's many people came by there looking at that old house, said that they had lived there, which a lot of them I doubted, but some of them I didn't. I didn't doubt that this man had played there as a child that painted this picture. And there were two very old ladies came there one day, and they said that their mother had married, let's see, what was his name now? Henry Swing. He was the one that got the land after the Dawes Commission. And but he was grown when this woman married him, and she had these two little girls by former marriage. And Henry drank, and he came home drunk one day and shot himself and shot his wife. His wife recovered, but he didn't.
They're in the house.
You have that history, don't you? These two old ladies told me this, and they were those two little girls.
Yeah.
That their mother, of course, had died long ago, but this was those two little girls, and I believed them. You couldn't make up a story like that, hardly,
No.
could you?
No.
But a lot of people said they'd lived in that house, and I imagine a lot of people had. But I didn't know that they did, for sure. And, you know, when the government first built that house, they said that they called that the 1,000-acre plantation, and that they brought Negro slaves, and that there were Negro slave houses all around the place there. And there was a lot of old square nails and things like that around the place at that time. So,
How much of the house is original? How much of the house is original?
Originally, it was just that south end here. I'll show you. This part of it, and the breezeway here, and a stairway up to this as a bedroom, I think it was. But of course, this was added on afterwards. The government didn't do this.
Didn't do that.
They did that afterwards. But that was all that was standing when I bought the property, and it was I never saw as many wasps and dirt dauber nests in my life. When they notified us that there was going to be some people from Oklahoma City come, my aunt and I got out there. I hired a truck, and they came and took all the old debris and dirt dauber nests and everything out of there and carried it away. I guess buried it, I don't know.
What made you decide to move to Eastern Oklahoma?
Well, that I don't know. My
You
grandfather,
had folks here,
my
didn't you?
my grandfather moved into McCurtain County in 1913, and my brother and I would come down and spend the summer when school was out from Wichita Falls, and we just loved this country on account of the trees, you know. That around Wichita Falls there were a few trees, and we just adored this country, and we'd always come down and spend the summer with our grandparents. And then just before the war broke out, a couple of years or so, my mother sold her hotel in Wichita Falls, and we bought a place adjoining my grandfather just on the east side, and lived down here during the war. And as soon as the war was over, we moved up to Payne County, where my mother ran the Yale Hotel in Yale, Oklahoma.
Did you do any work for the war effort during the war?
In the war? No,
Yeah.
I didn't. I wasn't old enough. In the First World War, I wasn't old enough. I did all kinds of work during the Second World War. We lived in Portland, Oregon. I donated my time, USO, and all kinds of things I did then.
Did your mother do any knitting for the soldiers during the war?
No, I didn't. I wouldn't have knitted for the Russians anyway. I never liked the Russians. I always distrusted them.
I've heard that there were a lot of the big trees around here in the early days.
Oh, there was. They're on my grandfather. Now, my grandfather's place was 5 miles north of Valiant on the old Indian Road, and on his place was like this bush here that has the berries on it. You know, there was a tree that
Hackberry.
I know. Huh?
Hackberry?
No, it's what do you call it?
Oh,
This one right here.
Palm?
Holly, yeah, a holly
holly,
tree.
holly.
It was a holly tree, and I know that the trunk of that tree must have been that big around. It was a huge, beautiful big tree, and there was lots of pine trees. And you know, when I learned that the company was going to put in this mill over at Vandever, it kind of worried me for fear they'd take all the timber out of here. But they planted thousands of acres of timber. It's just lovely. So I think it's going to help this country a lot. But there was beautiful pine trees. Oh, we just love this country.
Did you live in the chief's house?
No,
No, you just.
no. It wasn't livable.
Yeah. Do you know much about the history of the house?
I only know that the United States government built it for the Choctaw, chief of the Choctaw Nation. And his name was Greenleaf LaFleur, but he never lived in it. His brother did. And they brought all these Negro slaves with them when they came. I believe they came from Mississippi, if I'm not mistaken, over the Trail of Tears. And I don't know how long they lived there, because that was known as a 1,000-acre plantation, so they must have had a lot of land around there.
when was the state first interested in obtaining the chief's house, the historical society?
Well, I bought the place either in 1956 or 7, I'm not sure which. And we'd been there a couple of years, I think, before, I don't know, it must have been close to, must have been pretty close to 1960 when they first became very interested in it.
And did the state purchase the house from you?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
They didn't purchase it, they gave me $1.
Yeah.
And there was an acre of land went with the house. And then they built a little house out in front of it there for somebody to stay there and take care of it. And you couldn't see the house. You couldn't see the old house from the ranch house at all. It was just sitting there in front of it. And my aunt, by that time I had sold it to her daughter, my aunt's daughter. And my aunt and uncle's name is on that because they were my heirs at that time. And of course they're both dead, been dead long ago. But anyway, at that time they were my heirs, and so the Historical Society insisted that their names be on that gift. Well, that's how that happened. But the land belonged to me.
Yeah. What convinced you to sell the house and the acre for $1?
To do what?
What convinced you to sell the house to the state?
Oh, I'll tell you. One of the things was that my aunt and her husband had 2 children. And Rex was in the Navy and Ruth was married to a well-to-do man out there in New Mexico. She had 4 children, and Rex had 2 at that time, or 2 or 3. And then Mr. Beach had a lot of relatives, and they all came down here to see us. And all I had to do, it just seemed to me like, was cook and wash dishes to entertain their guests, and it just wore me out. And we began to not. My aunt and I grew up together. She was a year and a half older than I, and she was born in the Choctaw Nation also. And anyway, with all this stuff, I knew that I had to get out of it. I had to either get them out or I had to get out, and I couldn't live on that place by myself. And so I sold out to her daughter. And then her daughter died and left it to one of her daughters, and then she sold it, and there's a man, I think, that is a retired well, it wasn't Park Service, I believe it was well, anyway, he's a Forest Service man. I believe he was a retired Forest Service man. And so I think they cut a lot of the timber. But while I was there, I had 35,000 pine trees planted on that place. And that's a beautiful,
Yes,
it's pretty now, yeah. And a man by the name of Rhodes, who was head of the agricultural department here in the school, he and his boys came out there and set out those trees for me. The boys wanted to make money to take their trip, and so that's the way they did it.
Anything more about the house?
Do you have any other questions?
No.
The house is made of pine logs, do you know?
Well, they said the original pines. That's the reason they lasted so long. The old house.
Yeah. Yeah, Miss Stone said some family had.
And they tell me that the rock foundation that they have around the old farmhouse was originally from the north end of the old chief's house. That when the fireplaces fell down, they just used that rock around the base of the old farmhouse. I don't know that that's true, but that's what they told me.
Yeah. Miss Stone said the family had, what, 12 or 13 kids living in that house?
Yeah, I think so.
And so you sold the house in 1960? You sold the chief's house in, you say, 60 or 61?
Oh, some place along there. They probably have the.
Yeah.
They probably have that exact date. The historical
And
society.
again, would you tell me what convinced you to sell the house?
The best one.
What convinced you to sell the house?
Well, I just couldn't stay there any longer. There was too many people came in there to visit my aunt and her family, and it's just working me to death to try to take care of them. All I did was wash dishes and cook and make beds and all that sort of thing. It would just got to be too much. And then there was some drinking went on that I didn't care about.
Well, what convinced you to give the chief's house to the historical society?
What convinced me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I knew it had a historical interest, and having been 22 years in the National Park Service made me realize that it should be saved, not just sit there and rot down. And of course, it wasn't of any value to me just sitting there, so why not? They finally moved that office building around where it belongs, where it is now, which is nice.
Yeah.
But all that first time was just terrible, sitting there.
Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah. Of all the national parks you worked, which is your favorite? Of all the national parks you and your husband worked?
Well, we began our national park service in Yosemite National Park. We were 5 years there. Then we were transferred to Crater Lake. We were 10 years there. And then during the war came on, Second World War, and we were transferred to St. Louis, Missouri. And my husband's office was in that old courthouse in St. Louis, where, well, there's a big archway there now, you know, stainless steel archway. I haven't seen it, but it's been built since we were there. But then the war was just barely over when we were transferred here to Lake Texoma, which the Park Service didn't keep for very long, but then we were transferred then on to Santa Fe, New Mexico. So that's...
Which was your favorite place?
Oh, at that time, Yosemite, I wouldn't live in Yosemite now for anything. There's too many people there. But it is nice when I lived there. You could go away on your vacation and not lock your house or your apartment, whatever you had. But you can't do it now. You can't stir them with a stick there now. There's so many people. And none of the wildlife that used to graze there in the valley, on the valley floor is not there anymore. You know, they've taken to the high country. And, oh, I don't know. They just you used to could go down to the Merced River and have a picnic, and you can't do that anymore. There's too many people. And so many things have happened there at that park that I disapprove of. So.
Why was Lake Texoma given to the National Park Service?
Well, I wouldn't know what that, you know. I know that it was not National Park Service material in the first place. And so there's too much privately owned property all around that lake. You know, it's about 1,200 miles around that lake. And the private property is just unbelievable. It was then, and I guess it is now. I don't know. But anyway, the National Park Service decided that that wasn't for them, so they turned it back to the Army engineers. I think they had it 3 or 4 years, something like that.
And you moved back to...
From there to Santa Fe, New Mexico.
And then to Oklahoma.
That Santa Fe, New Mexico is headquarters for Region 3 in the National Park Service.
You said you did work for the war effort in Portland, Oregon?
Well, when we first went out to Portland, Oregon, he worked for an outfit called the Lear Spring Company. You know, long years ago when you had cars, they weren't equipped with all the nice things that they were equipped with now. And so that company furnished them, and you had to buy them extra. And so they had tires, and they had bumpers, and they had all kinds of things that you bought to go in your car. And my husband worked for them for a few years until he had this brain tumor, and then he went into the Veterans Hospital and was transferred down to California. He was in the hospital down there for 13 months.
What did you do for the war effort in Oregon?
What?
What did you do for the war effort in Portland? You said that you volunteered
I
time.
didn't say Portland. I said in Medford, Oregon.
Oh, I'm sorry, man.
Medford, Oregon. Well, USO, and if you remember, when they attacked Pearl Harbor, the whole country was put in darkness. You couldn't have any lights on at night. We were especially afraid out in there because afraid they were going to come to the West Coast, you know. And so we had watchers, and we had doctors that you could call at the drop of a hat, and everybody signed up to do everything they could, and that was the kind of work I did. And my husband, he was in the Park Service that time, and he registered all these people, you know, to get their names so they knew what they were doing. And then he also went to school and learned how to, he thought maybe he might be able to go in the air service, airplanes, but he was too old, they wouldn't take him. So he went to school, and then he could talk before a class, you know. And so the man that knew all these different things, he couldn't talk before the class, and he got my husband to do it. So we did all kinds of work like that. A lot of the men were taken out of the country, and if you know the Rogue River Valley, it's a valley that produces an awful lot of fruit. And everybody pitched in to help save those fruit crops. The bankers would go out and help load the cars, you know, at night, and anybody that had any spare time would donate it.
Everything?
About the base. Are you willing to donate that to the old fort, no, Oklahoma Historical Society?
What? That picture?
Uh-huh.
Well, yes, if it's taken care of.
Yeah, that's what we mean now.
Yeah, I don't want to, you know something, I have given some things out there. I don't know whether they're still there or not.
I don't much believe they are.
Just a minute. See if I can find something.
Picture of the base.
The picture of this. Which we would have to do paperwork, I mean, you know.
Oh, yeah.
But, that would go good out there,
Oh,
really.
yeah.
What a
Well, I don't find it just now, but I gave part of a coverlet that was my husband's father was from, I believe, Pennsylvania, if I'm not mistaken. He was of German origin, but he wasn't born in Germany, but some of his relatives were. Anyway, this coverlet was the sheep was grown on the farm, the Chrisler farm, and then it was woven into thread, and then they made these coverlets, and they were about in strips about like that and sewn together, and in blue and white. And I gave a piece of that for them to show out there. And
Who did you give it to?
well, I think LaFleur was the one that taken care of the place when I donated that.
That to the chief's house?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
There was supposed to be a chest that had those things in it. Is there one out
Yes,
there? Will you look in there?
Yeah.
And a piece of a blanket, I think, that I gave. I'm not sure what all now I did donate. But I wasn't quite sure it was all taken care of. There was a time there when there was nobody there. Some boys went out there and wrecked the place one time, tore down the flag, and first one thing and another. But this man that painted this, yes, I'll donate it. But that's the only thing I have about the old house. I had, Miss Wright gave me a copy of the specifications for the old house, but I let my aunt's daughter, when she bought the place, have it, and she was to return it, and she didn't do it. So I lost that. But you have the specifications anyway. The Historical Society does.
Well, now, the picture over here from the Civil War,
Yeah.
were you talking about donating that to the Historical
No,
Society?
I wasn't. Yeah,
You
I
wasn't?
haven't quite decided what to do about
okay.
that. But of course, I don't have any relatives to leave it to.
Now, we would have to do paperwork to, before we would
Yeah.
accept it, 'cause
Yeah. And so, I'll think about it. Because I don't have any, you see, I've outlived all my family.
Yeah.
I have some cousins back up here in the Sand Hills, but I don't know them too well. We don't,
well, we would display it
where?
in the museum out there at the fort.
At the fort.
At the fort.
And that fort is always maintained, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, now that I think about that, I wouldn't want to give it to the old house, chief's
Yeah.
house, because I'm afraid of that. They've had too many people out there looking after it that didn't know any more about it than a man in the moon. You know that's what I do. I like Cotton Davis. He's interested in it.
Yes,
I like him.
Where'd you start school? Where? Where'd you start the school?
Where did I start the school?
Yes, ma'am.
Hobart, Oklahoma. See, that's when my mother and father separated, and he bought this house in Hobart on Monroe Street so they could put me in school for the first time. And, so then from there I went to school in Fort Burnett, Texas. My grandfather had moved there and had a grocery store in Fort Burnett, Texas. They call it Burt Burnett now, but then they called it Fort Burnett. It was named after a man by the name of Burke, and his last name was Burnett or Burnett. I don't know which, but they called it Burt Burnett then.
Was he Choctaw? Was your father?
No. He was from my grandfather was from Kentucky, and my grandmother was from Missouri. And he was too young to be in the Civil War, but after it was over, everything they had was gone. And everybody had to get out and make their own way. And my grandfather had pretty good school education, and he came down into East Texas and taught school a while. And then he came up through the territory and finally wound up in Missouri where he met my grandmother. I never dreamed that I'd live to be the age I am. I was not, for a long time, not too interested in the history of Oklahoma. I like the history, European history, like Egypt and like that, and the Revolution in France and that I just ate up, but I never thought very much about Oklahoma. I never thought I'd live to be as old as I am. Well, there's a lot of people that is as old as I am that was born in the Choctaw Nation, I'm sure, or in the Indian Territory, one of them, still alive.
Well, how long did you stay in Hobart?
Well, I imagine, of course, I was very young, you know, I was starting school then. Well, 3 years, I'd say offhand. I really don't know. You know, when we moved on to that homestead, there were an awful lot of German people that homesteaded there too. Some of them built lowly houses, homes. We didn't have a very nice one, but we did have we had a storm cellar that was floored and sealed and had a bed down there, so we could go down in the storm when a storm came, and there were a lot of them. And but a lot of those German people had worked in the worked for the railroad company in Chicago, and they had quite a little money, you see, and so they built pretty nice homes. We had a neighbor named Hass that he had worked for the Pullman company in Chicago, had done upholstery and that sort of thing. And then there were people that lived in dugouts.
Well,
I expect my grandfather Allen is buried in a little cemetery south of Lone Wolf, because they had the property adjoining my father's, because my father was able to buy somebody else that improved one that didn't have money to improve on it, you know, and he bought it, and my grandfather Allen and his family moved on to it, and so I imagine that he was an old man when I last saw him, so I imagine he's buried in that little cemetery that's south of Lone Wolf.
anything else?
That's all I can think of.
Well, I want to appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to take that picture now? Or do you want to take it later?
Hanging it on the
Yeah.
wall, the picture.
Should see that.
Yeah. That's up to you.
There was another self-taught artist that used to come down there and paint the old house. Her name was Chrisler. Ruth, I believe, was her first name. And she had a painting of the old house before it was, as my aunt used to say, remodeled. And in the Historical Society, and they took it down and put it down the basement somewhere, which made her very angry. But she used to come down there and paint. Ruth, Chrisler, and she lived in Muskogee.
Well, let me find out
Yeah.
if they'll let us display it. Now, they might not let us keep that out there for.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
And you don't want it to go to the chief's house?
Well, the man was awfully nice to get. Now,
Yeah.
you know, it's got lots of mistakes.
Yeah.
That house has got the painting has a lot of mistakes in it. He was a self-taught artist, and he painted it like he remembered it. But anyway, I'd hate for anything to happen to it.
Yeah. Well, let me find out before,
Okay.
cause I wouldn't want to, take
Yeah.
it out there and then.
Something happened to it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I gave LaFleur, when I moved into this house, I found an old map of Fort Towson. And so I gave that to him. I don't know whatever happened to it.
I don't either. We have.
So that's why,
Yeah.
you see.
Yeah. Well, that's the reason I don't want to take it to
Yeah.
find out
Yeah.
what what we can do with it, because if I take it, it will be out there.
Now,
or-
Trap may know where that map is, but I don't know whether he does or not. But I gave it to him, and it was
Yeah.
an old map of Fort Towson.
What is your address here? What is your address here?
Box 115, Fort Towson.
Okay, thank you.
You're right.
Can we get your autograph? We need your permission to use the tape for the society.
Right here?
Yes, ma'am.
I write better than that, mostly, but not on my knee.
Oh, that's fine. So how long have you lived in this house?
Oh, about 25 years.
Yeah.
I lived out there 11 years.
Do you remember the first school you attended?
The first what?
The first school? Do you remember
No, I
that?
can't remember. That was in Hobart, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I was a very young child, just starting school.
If I may ask, why did your parents separate?
Well, my father was, he didn't drink, he didn't swear, he didn't chase women or anything like that, but he didn't have a very good disposition. So my mother says. Now, I don't know, I just have. And so she just couldn't put up with it. She had 4 children by him. And the first child died, it was a boy, and then I came along, and then there was a second child, was a girl, and then my brother lived, and so she had, when they separated, she got the children, and she got the house and lot in Hobart, and she got $1,000, and she also was supposed to have child support, which she didn't get. He didn't pay it. So I don't know whatever happened to my father. I have no idea. I had a list of my father's brothers and sisters and all, and it's somewhere here in my things, but I'm like all old people. I just place things and forget where I put them.
Oh, I do that all the time.
My worst problem now is remembering names. I cannot. I meet people in Hugo that I know, and well, I haven't seen you in a long time, how are you? And I know them, but put a name to them, I can't do it. And of course I don't drive anymore because I don't think it would be safe. I have a car, but I have somebody drive it for me.
Well, ready?
Yeah.